there is an association is formed between these two representations in the mind of the subject. And it's quite empty now. So it's quite important to understand what is learned during Pavlovian learning, Pavlovian classical learning, because that will tell us something of how these stimuli, these conditional stimulus, the cue that I was talking before, are able to influence decision. And the traditional view, also note that this may be important in the other for the other speakers, but there is a gate. There is a motivational gate between the US, which is, as we said, food or any salient stimulus in the environment, and the response. So the response occurs is naturally and evolutionary appropriate response for food, but is also gated by the motivational state of the subject. So provided the subject is hungry, that response will be elicited by food, otherwise no response. So there is a gate, which has a particularly importance in theoretical importance. Anyway, the traditional view, and then I'll tell the difference with our view. The traditional view was that an association is formed between these two events, the conditional stimulus and the outcome. And this association is called a stimulus-outcome association, a stimulus-stimulus association. And this is a major difference. So the stimulus, the CS, becomes a predictive stimulus of the outcome. As you see in this view of Pavlovian conditioning, there is apparently, seemingly, no room for action. Okay, because this actually is one of the distinctive feature of Pavlovian learning that we read in textbook. The action of the agent, it doesn't matter, really doesn't matter to receive the outcome. This is very different from what happens in the instrumental conditioning, which the action is necessary in order to receive the outcome. Here, action is not involved. There is a response. See, there are two steps. The CS activated representation of the US, and US activated of the representation of the response, activated response. But there is no, in this view, there is no really association with action. So this is called the stimulus-outcome model of Pavlovian learning. It is also the more cognitive type of model that we have. It is also the dominant view. If you read any book or any article on Pavlovian learning, they will suggest that there is what is formed is an association between these two. It actually, usually the words that are used is that the subject learns a value function. So learns that there is a value of the US. US has an intrinsic value because it's food. So it's a valuable object for the agent, that this value is transferred on the conditional stimulus slowly, iteratively through reward prediction error and dopamine. But there is this transfer, and this is what the agent is learning. The value of the CS. The CS is initially neutral, then becomes valuable with successive presentation of this pairing. And this idea that the cue is predictive of the reward that the subject will receive without doing any specific action. And this in contrast with the instrumental conditioning, which action is necessary. So this view of the classical and instrumental is also correspond to what we know, what is the usual, also there, traditional view of reinforcement learning, which is a theoretical learning model that is used both for artificial and biological agents, and explain how subjects are able to maximize in their interaction with the environment, are able to maximize reward. And there are two algorithms in reinforcement learning. One is called the prediction algorithm, which again is very similar to classical conditioning. What is learned is a value function, is the value of a particular state the subject aims to go to. and another function, another algorithm that is called control function, which is instead important. It has to do with instrumental conditioning and helps the subject to develop a so-called policy behavior. So they specify which muscle, which action, which response to prepare for instrumental response. But this control is not a main role in classical conditioning. Is only limited to instrumental conditioning. This view was also favored, let's skip this one, by the interpretation of dopamine is crucial in the, although we did not study dopamine, we would have liked, but we couldn't study dopamine in our project. Dopamine is a key component because we know this is important for learning. And the major interpretation of how dopamine works is just that it is crucial for updating the value of the prediction. So again, through the reward prediction error, the subject learns through errors, learns the value of the CS. The CS initially is paired, but the subject has no expectation, no prediction about reward. And when the first reward occurs, there is this huge reward prediction error that updates the value of the CS. And this is progressively updated until the subject forms the new value of the conditional stimulus. So also the main interpretation of the data from monkey neurophysiology and animal in general is in line with the idea that classical conditioning, classical Pavlovian conditioning has to do with forming prediction and updating this prediction through, thanks to the dopamine, through reward prediction error. Again, there is no space for action. But what is according to us, the missing point here? I mean, the potentially missing point. I'm not saying that we are right, but we want to add a further layer to this story. And this layer is about action. And the major point is this, our view is a little different. So this is a traditional view in which a cognitive association is formed between the CS and US, and this is association through a gate to the response. The alternative that we want to support through our experiment is that also there is a stimulus that is associated with the response, stimulus-response model of Pavlovian learning. And this is actually this direct learning from the CS to the response is not indirect, by direct learning from the CS to the response is the main idea of our project. So the response matters, and actually, in our view, is even more relevant. So what is learning the subject, what the agent is learning is not much a prediction, but is learning a behavioral policy. So a behavior is learning which action to initiate, which action, with which probability, in which time, and with which vigor to initiate the action. So it's a different view, okay? And on which basis to have this idea? Well, first of all, this is a motorway to decision making. The motorway to interpret how cue in the environment influence. To cue influence because they have a motor significance, and they acquire this motor significance through Pavlovian learning. But how is possible this? Well, the crucial point are this. First of all, so there is this direct learning of the response. And this makes sense, first of all, because if dopamine and the basal ganglia have a particular role, we know that those are critical. They are key structure in the motor system. They have an important and reciprocal connection with motor and premotor cortex. Although the emphasis has always been on the subcortical, those structures, they they interact, they are reciprocally connected with the motor system, premotor and supplementary motor, a cingulate area in general with the motor system, the frontal lobe. It's true that dopamine is associated with reward prediction error, but many papers now, many studies have seen that dopamine is also produced, physically discharge of dopamine by neurons when the subject initiate an action, particularly when this action is associated with reward. So, for instance, in the animal that receive a juice, the licking movement of the tongue are associated, just in anticipation of the arrival of the juice, is associated with dopamine discharge before the reward is actually given. There is a parsimony principle. Okay, our model is much more include only one layer that connect the CS to the response, so is reduce complexity. In only one step we go from the stimulus to the response. The other instead involves at least one step more, from the CS to the representation of the US, from the US to the response. So this is a complexity that we can avoid in our vision of the. Also, there is actually quite still in discussion discussed whether we can actually measure value in the brain. I mean, not everybody agree that we have the possibility to distinguish value, for instance, from action, or value from sensory. So our view is more embodied, okay, because we look at the primitives in the motor system or in the sensory motor system, and we skip this step of the value representation and prediction. So in our case, prediction is actually transformed directly into a behavioral policy in a particularly motor program to harvest the reward, to collect the reward. Because it's true that maybe in Pavlovian conditioning, action is not necessary to receive the outcome, but is necessary to for the consummation of the outcome, to use the outcome. So when the outcome arrives, you need to collect and use the outcome. There is this consummatory phase, and this is what probably, in our view, is the subject preparing the consummatory response that allowed the subject to effectively use the outcome. Okay, so this is the general framework in which we moved, and our hypothesis about the motor significance of the cue, the importance of the motor system in general for cue-controlled decision making. And now I leave the floor to my colleague, Sarah.